And we're back. She is the co-creator of Black Lives Matter, host of the podcast Lady Don't Take No, and author of the new book, The Purpose of Power. Please welcome back Alicia Garza. Alicia, good to see you.
Hi, it's so good to be here with you.
So in the book, one of the lessons you write about from 2016 is that while protests are important, they are not enough to shift politics. What do you wish accompanied the protests back then? And looking forward, what tactics are you using to engage with politicians more directly?
Oh, this is why I love you, Jon. It's all the right questions all the time. So,
Thank you.
I mean, I wish that in 2016, what we had alongside protests was a robust policy agenda that we could have used protests to leverage. And moving into 2021, I think we're in a very similar position in the sense that we have opportunity to change the rules that have been rigged against our communities for a long time, from police violence to a lack of access to healthcare. It's time for our movements to be able to put forward clear ways to unrig the rules and to expand opportunity and to expand wellness and well-being for everyone. That's why I started the Black Futures Lab after the 2016 election, because I knew that in order for us to achieve the things that we were taking to the streets for, we also needed to be able to mobilize and motivate and activate voters in this country to help support those agendas. In fact, Jon, I'm so excited to be here because today, the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund just launched our Build Back Bolder agenda, which we are calling a Black mandate for the Biden-Harris administration. We know that we've come out of 4 years, right, of absolute insanity. But the truth of the matter is things were not good for Black communities before the Trump era. And with the pandemic, it really has been another nail in the coffin that we're being buried alive in already. And so what we've done is we've taken 30,000 responses from Black communities in all 50 states. We translated that into a Black agenda for 2020. And now what we've done is we've narrowed down and said, hey, we know that there are core priorities for this administration this year, and we share those. Recovery from COVID-19 and relief. We know that economic justice is one of the pillars of this administration, climate justice, and also racial justice. So what we've done is created a mandate that provides a roadmap for how we get there, using racial justice as a vehicle for us to be able to get to our goals. I'm excited because we are out here calling for, not just a one-time stimulus payment, but actually monthly stimulus payments with an auto stabilizer for Black communities and all communities to get back on our feet, using racial justice to ensure an equitable distribution of the vaccine, which we know is not coming into Black communities, even though Black communities have been hit first and worst by this pandemic. And then finally, making sure that nobody is being evicted from their home or having their home foreclosed on in the midst of a pandemic and in the midst of almost a year now of trying to claw our way out of this crisis with no supports and no relief. Those are just some of the immediate demands that we are levying at this administration, and we're excited to work with them to make them real.
How receptive have they been so far? How does it feel? Like, obviously, we went through this 4 years where on virtually anything you thought of, the presidency was an adversary. They were against, they were not just against progress. I mean, they were, it was one of the great threats this country's ever faced. Now we have a more nuanced situation. How often, right now on a number of these issues, where do they feel like allies and where do they feel like adversaries?
I love the fact that you said nuance because we need it when talking about this administration. I got to tell the truth. Leading up to November, I wouldn't say that the Biden campaign was excited about partnering with progressives. That was a big contradiction that we were facing. We were trying to get rid of the devil in the White House while also dealing with someone who wanted to take more of a center position on basically everything. But we also saw Black communities across the nation push that campaign over the finish line. It was large part Black communities who put Joe Biden and Kamala Harris into the White House and then subsequently changed the balance of power in Congress. That's important. And now I think what we're facing is that we've gotten a lot more engagement than I think obviously we did under the Trump administration, and more proactive engagement, I would say, than we did under the Obama administration. But with that comes challenges. With the polarized situation in this country, there's still too many people who are trying to figure out how to appease Republicans, especially the most extreme version of this party that does not want to see forward motion. And in fact, they've built an entire agenda around moving backwards. And then they're confronted, right, with an administration that is essentially saying we just need to get back to the status quo, as if the status quo was good for anyone. So we've seen politics in this country move farther and farther to the right. And I don't envy the position of the Biden-Harris administration in having to navigate those dynamics. But that's exactly why we are pushing to build back bolder. We don't need to capitulate to a Republican Party that is a mere shadow of itself. And frankly, I'm not sure that there is a ton of common ground that we can move forward on. Look, we've seen all of the things that have been happening over the last 4 weeks. And frankly, even in the face of an attempted insurrection, the Republican Party continued to be on the wrong side of history. So we're trying to encourage this administration to continue to do the engagement it's doing. It's great that, we're getting phone calls from officials in the administration wanting to get to know us better. But as we're getting to know each other better, I think it's also important that we make some commitments to each other. It was Black communities that put you there. And so now you do have a mandate to deliver on the things that Black communities need to see. And frankly, it's not just about what Black communities want. I think we've seen time and time again that what's good for Black communities is good for all of America. And I think we need to go into this next 4 years with that at the front of our minds.
So how do you think about the balance between, in this fight, sort of pressure versus persuasion, even with Democrats? You talk about not just like kind of talking to your own tribe, but trying to grow your tribe across differences to reach sort of common goals. How do you think about, like, where does persuasion fit into this?
Well, I think the persuasion has to happen on the Democratic side of the ticket. Again, I think that the Republican Party right now is showing that it is the party of no, thank you, and we don't have anything creative to offer. And so while we know that in a lot of places, bipartisan support is necessary to get things done, I think we have to take a sober look at the situation and say, while we have power in all 3 branches of government, we need to wield it in a way that sets the terms for what governance is going to look like, not just over the next 4 years, but over the next decade, 2 decades, and 3 decades. At the same time, I think that Democrats have a huge issue, and we've had it, honestly, since the beginning of the Trump era, which is this notion that everybody follows the rules. And as long as everybody follows the rules, we'll get somewhere. If the Trump administration did not teach us that they don't give a shit about rules, and that in fact, their entire existence is around eliminating any rules that will regulate their behavior or anybody else's, then we've missed the boat. And there's a lot of talk right now about unity and coming together. But anybody will tell you, you can't solve a problem that you haven't acknowledged exists in the first place. I think we've done a better job in this period of acknowledging that we have a serious problem on our hands. The challenge is, in a lot of ways, I hope it's not too little too late. We've spent so much time trying to acquiesce and trying to build bridges and offer olive branches that we haven't set the terms of engagement. And that puts us at a disadvantage over and over again. I think it may have been even part of the reason, right, that we weren't able to achieve, right, the kind of accountability that I think all Americans wanted from January 6th. Why are we seeing people who stormed the Capitol and attempted to overthrow the government really facing a lot of leniency? Why are we now kind of moving the conversation towards task forces and commissions rather than being more stalwart in our efforts to make sure that that never happens again? We can't always spend our time looking backwards and assessing what happened. We also have to take action in the here and now to make sure that those things don't happen again. but also give people a different compass to follow around what we want this country to be and who we want to be within it.
So on this question of unity, Jen Psaki, who's the White House press secretary, she made this point. She said, like, when Joe Biden talks about unity, he doesn't mean that there should just be one political party. There's still going to be Democrats. There's still going to be Republicans. I've joked that it's basically, treat people with respect, argue from a shared set of facts, and don't burn the Capitol down, right? Like, that's sort of like a 3-part rule for unity. To your mind, you talked about rules. We're about to have this big fight about passing legislation to protect the right to vote, to expand the right to vote, to stop gerrymandering, to get money out of politics through H.R. 1, through For the People Act, to begin looking at statehood for D.C. and the disenfranchised in the District of Columbia. To do that, we may have to change some rules where even some Democrats are reluctant to get rid of things like the filibuster. How are you thinking about this fight for voting rights? And what role do you think kind of outside pressure can play in the coming months?
Well, I think that this should be one of the signature issues for the Democratic Party, if not the signature issue. And in fact, if Black communities had not overcome, sidestepped, and been resilient in the face of rampant voter suppression, from misinformation and disinformation online to literal, poll taxes and, voting tests, right, that we saw in the Jim Crow era, we wouldn't have a Democratic majority. We would not have a Democrat in the White House in the Oval Office. And certainly we wouldn't have shifted the balance of power in the Senate. I think that part of our challenge here, again, is that I wonder sometimes if we are stuck in the politics of the 1990s or the 2000s, as opposed to the politics of 2021. And in the politics of 2021, we have a Republican Party that I don't even think is the Republican Party anymore. And we also have a Democratic Party that, frankly, a lot of people have lost faith in and a lot of people have lost engagement with. And when people turned out in massive numbers this summer to oust one of the greatest threats to democracy in my lifetime, they didn't do it out of allegiance to the Democratic Party. They did it out of allegiance to themselves. People said, I got to survive. And the way things are going right now, I don't have a shot. And I think Democrats have to look at the carnage and look at the results of that and say, how do we remake ourselves into the party of the people, knowing that our counterparts, right, are completely in shambles and they don't even know who they are anymore. We're seeing that. We saw that on television for the last 3 weeks, right? They're having a complete identity crisis. And the small amount of people left in the Republican Party that still stand for the party of the 1990s are a sad minority of that party right now. So I'm of the opinion that, one, I think a lot of people are thinking maybe we need more than 2 parties. I'm not going to get into the whole thing about is it the Green Party, is it whatever, but I will say that there is increasing evidence, right, that it may be that we're at a point where parties are undergoing the kind of transformation that could either make them irrelevant or make them better. On the other hand of things, I think that, frankly, Democrats will be in for a sad, sad time if we don't take voting rights as seriously as it is. We have to enfranchise as many people to be able to participate in the political process as possible to avoid authoritarianism. We narrowly escaped it in this last election cycle, but we're certainly not out of the woods.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we know that Republicans have the ability to gerrymander enough seats in the House to take back the House. And do we really think they wouldn't object in a 2024 presidential election if they have both the House and the Senate? Do we really think they won't do the exact same thing when they have the power to actually stop electoral votes from being counted?
I mean, that's the thing. They're already doing the autopsy of how they lost. And I mean, you and I both know that they just were not on their digital game in the middle of a pandemic, maybe because they weren't paying attention to it. But that doesn't mean that they're not regrouping and making their plans right now, not just to take back power, but to keep it. That's why this issue is so incredibly important, not just to Black communities, but to everybody in this country.
Alicia Garza, so good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.